Welcome back. We are back again with another lesson on ethics in visual journalism. In our previous classes, let me just briefly recap. We have talked about, initially we have reviewed together some of the international standard code of ethics that are globally recognized, and then we have reviewed some code of ethics that are adopted by different media houses and agencies, for example Al Jazeera and AFP. Then we have also looked at few code of ethics adopted by regional federation of journalists or photojournalist associations. What are the codes that they have adopted as their guideline to govern their conduct on the ground as they go about visually reporting. Then we have moved on to discussing some other more complicated issues in visual representation, visual reporting, which includes feminist ethics, especially related to reporting on victims of sexual survivors of sexual violence, or covering conflict situations or war. And then we also talked about undoing stereotypes, how pre-existing social, historical and other biases helps perpetuate creating similar kind of stories, and how that affects social situations. Today we are nearing the completion of our course, and today I will be talking about on-site editorial decisions that we make while we take photos, while we make images. So when you go to with a camera to the field with a brief on your assignment on hand, we make certain editorial decision on the site, and what are we expected of when we make those decisions, and most importantly, what's the significance of having an alignment between the editorial decisions we make on site and the editorial decisions made on the editorial desk. So that if you ask me what's the learning point or the lesson that we are trying to make in today's session, is to look for the alignment, ways to have some sort of alignment between the editorial decision making in the field and in the media houses, or on the, as we always prefer to say, on the editorial desk. Because we have been talking about how to navigate difficult situation, how to report undoing biases, and in all these decisions, one thing that has been emphasized repeatedly, and I have done so as well in our earlier class, to maintain some level of impartiality. And please note that I am not talking about objectivity. I am talking about impartiality, and intentionally avoiding the word or the idea of objectivity, partly because the idea of objectivity is an impossible, impractical expectation on photographers, visual reporters, or any researcher, anyone who is working on documentation, collecting or writing stories, because we are, as I have said in the previous classes as well, when I'm given an assignment, I'm going to the field with my own understanding of the issue or the situation, and I have an editorial brief on my hand, which also gives me certain direction, and both the brief and my understanding are influenced by the larger social, political and economic processes. So it's an undue expectation from a photographer to be objective, because there's no such thing as objective, and there are tons of things written about this whole question of subjective versus objective image making, and we do not, the scope of this class does not allow us to engage with that large body of work, and that's also not where I want to get at with today's class. my main emphasis today is to show how difficult these editorial decisions we make on the site, and how there is a there is a need to have certain level of communication, certain level of alignment between the work that's done by an individual photographer, individual visual reporter, and the editors. For example, if you're given an assignment to cover a story on a public protest, you go there and find out that the size of the crowd is smaller than the mainstream political rallies, and more importantly, you figured out that the political demands that are made are not something that you align with. So what are the decisions what are the editorial decisions you have to make in that particular situation? One, you could take a picture that depicts the true size of the crowd. So you give the viewer, the reader of your news, the real in an idea, the nature, to what extent the public has support for this particular demand. Or you take an angle that makes the crowd look even smaller, and it visually suggests the reader that the demand does not have enough public support. You can, if you think of the question of impartiality in making editorial decisions on the ground, if you think of your responsibility to the public to portray a situation as close to the real as possible, then your decision should be the first one, that is to take a photo that shows the real size of the crowd. And these are the small, these are the small and small decisions that we make that really counts on in the next day when people get the newspaper. And these may sound small, but these are, in the larger scheme of things, these are major ethical decisions that we make. But let me give you another example of a public protest. For example, there is a protest gathering for reduction of the student fee in a private university. And in private university, for example, in Bangladesh, student politics is not allowed. There is no student government body. Since students are paying tuition from there, and it's not a small amount, students don't take the risk even if they support the demand. So there is, in that particular private university, there is a stronger support for the protest and the demand that the students are making. But once you arrive at the gathering, you find out that there are only 5 or 6 students carrying three or 4 placards are rallying and walking about in front of the main entrance of the private university. What do you do? What can you do? Because even if the demand it appears to you as legit, there is not strong visual for you. The visual that you are presented with in reality, it does not give you enough, does not support you with evidence to support that there are students behind this demand. Now a different example of protest. Here you support the demand, and you know that the group that has organized, the demography that has organized the protest has a larger demography, has the support for the demand. But so it's a protest, for example, let's say it's a protest in a private university against the proposed hike in student fee. In private university in Bangladesh, or in most cases, students don't have as much power as they wanted it to be to the decision making of the universities, because either they don't have student government, and mostly because since they pay for their education, they do not want to take risk of getting disciplinary action taken against them, because it involves a lot of economic loss on their part, on their parents' part. So even when you know that largest student body has support for the demand, they support the demand, but they are not, you arrive on the site and you find out that there aren't that many students, and what do? You end up, you see that there are only 4 or 5 students with 3 placards walking in front of the main entrance of the private university, and they're chanting their slogans. Again, you have to do what you have to do, and that is to portray the real situation on the ground, even if you know for a fact that their largest student body supports the demand. And these are the apparently small editorial decision you make on the ground that has to be in alignment with the editorial decisions made on the editorial table. And throughout this conversation, I kept mentioning the importance of having an alignment between the editorial decision made on site by the photographer and the editorial decisions made on the desk. And the reason I am emphasizing to explain why I think this is important, I want to refer to an iconic image from 2014. If you were following the Black Lives Matter in 2014 or in the subsequent years, you probably have seen this photograph, and it's there on your screen. It's a photograph taken by Robert Cohen, a community photojournalist from United States. It shows a African American man with dreadlock wearing a t-shirt with the flag that has the flag of America imprinted on it, and he has a bag of potato chips on his one hand and a flaming tear gas canister on his other hand, and he is throwing it back to the police. It makes, if you have followed the movement, you know how during in the past years, the Black Lives Matter movement, there were many moments where there were police responded with violent means, and the protester had tried to respond with violence as well, and it has not, and the solidarity within the protest rallies did not, and many did not endorse the violence. Many said that we're marching in peace, we want to continue to fight for racial justice in the United States through non-violent movement. But there are, as we see in this photograph, or as this photograph was presented to the public, that the protest turned violent. There were violent moments in which police and the protester were engaged in violence. So what happened, as Robert Cohen said once after he was awarded with Pulitzer Prize and other prize for this photograph, that night was that the night of the photograph was taken was largely peaceful, and those of the photographer that were on the ground in Ferguson were reporting to their respective media houses that the night has so far been violent. But the lot of photograph that he sent to his media house included this particular image, and the editors in his media house picked this particular photograph that he thought best captured the essence of the night. And the photograph immediately became viral. It became because public was ready to see maybe because the public was ready to see the violent moment being iconized, or there might be there were probably many different reasons that the photograph immediate, because it's also a very beautiful aesthetically pleasing photograph, so it became viral and got the recognition that it has gotten. The man in the photograph was hounded down. He was accused of hurting the police, and once he faced the legal system, he responded. His response was that I didn't throw a burning can back at police as is shown in the photograph. Rather, I threw it out of the way of the children, those who were present at on that night of the night that the photo was captured. So you see the version of the subject and the version of the photographer and the editor, there are discrepancy. And what is even tragic is that 2 years after the photograph was taken, the man, the subject of the photograph, was found dead in his car, and those who are part of his community claims that or thinks that he may have been murdered. So there may be no connection to his death and the photograph, but what it urges us to think is that when you are talking about ethics in visual journalism, it is not just on the individual photograph who goes to the site, who visited the ground and takes the photographer. The ethical burden must be shared by all who are involved in the process of image making, from the moment an assignment is decided to the moment when the image is presented to the public. Throughout this process, everyone who is involved must be ethically in alignment. They all must share the same ethical principle. If you are talking about impartiality of a photographer, that same impartiality must be practiced by all other who are involved in this process, because the photograph is beautiful. It carries it is aesthetically pleasing, but it signals different messages for different audiences. And the reception that this photograph has gotten from the colored artist within United States says that makes that point. A collective of racially diverse, ethnically diverse, and diverse with sexual preferences, a collective called Authority Collective, termed this photograph as a photograph that is taken by a man from the white community, and they called him an opportunist who take a moment of public trauma and outrage and turn it into a moment of opportunity, moment of his personal gain. And now, as we are reading this photograph, nearly 7 years after the photo was taken, it's hard for us to make a judgment about exactly what has happened, who believed what, when taking the picture, when deciding to use the picture for the news media the next day. And of course, the public readership is definitely diverse. But the controversy itself says us that there was a communication gap, or there is a, I wouldn't say communication gap, but there is a need for a shared ethical understanding of the question of impartiality or the complexity of the situation that we should be very aware of. And so this is our second last class, and I bring this case of ethical alignment between all actors involved in image making in the news industry, and to unburden individual photographer, because it is not only your doing that could make the image industry more act responsibility. There are a lot of other political, social, economic factors that factors into this process. And if we talk about ethical decision making on the site and off the site, all those are involved needs to be on board in this journey. So for today's assignment, I'm asking you, in the description of the video you will see a link which has a video of a conversation between Robert Cohen, the photographer of this particular image, and a journalist from the board of Pulitzer Prize, and they are talking about this particular image and what the photographer think of the image and how he has taken it and what happened to the photograph. Follow this debate around this photograph and write down what you think about this debate, what do you propose that Robert Cohen could have done differently in that particular situation to avoid some of the consequences of these particular images, or do you think if in anything at all he could have done to make things different? So I will end here with this assignment. Do visit the site that I just mentioned, and let's talk about this question of collective ethical action in news industry, in the image industry next week when we conclude this class. Thank you.